Velkommen til MedicusPodden, en podcast om fertilitet og kvinnehelse. I dagens episode så har vi med oss professor Sheena Lewis fra Examen i England. Hun er en av de fremste forskerne på mannlig fertilitet, som vi har antageligvis i Europa i alle fall. Hun er veldig opptatt av at mannlig fertilitet er noe mer enn antall sædceller og bevegeligheten til dem, og at det er noe med DNA-et, og at DNA-et kan bli skadet, og at det må også undersøkes for å kunne gi en optimal behandling. Vi har en time samtale om alt fra hvordan man tester mannlig fertilitet, og hva man kan gjøre selv for å øke sin fertilitet, og også hvordan denne testingen kan være med å forbedre fertilitetsbehandlingen. Jeg har lært veldig mye av Sheena, og det tror jeg og håper at dere også vil gjøre.
MedicusPodden.
Nå er du endelig gravid. Det varierer veldig fra par til par.
Takk for besøket.
Velkommen til MedicusPodden.
Velkommen til MedicusPodden, en podcast om fertilitet og kvinnehelse. I dag så har vi med oss professor Sheena Lewis fra England. Denne podcasten den foregår på engelsk, og det skifter vi over til nå. Hi Sheena, good to see you.
Hello, it's great to be talking to you.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you wanted to join our podcast and learn us more about male fertility. So, but before we dive into the details of male fertility, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you came to be interested in this topic?
Okay, well, that's something I could talk about all day because I'm a professor in reproductive medicine in Queens University Belfast. And I've been working in the area of male infertility for probably about 25 years. And it came about because we were looking initially at semen analysis, and we realized that wasn't the best way to diagnose a man's fertility. And so we spent about 25 years looking at other tests and other ways of predicting not only a man's fertility, but how well he would do if he had treatment. And we tried lots of different things, over the years, and none of them really worked. None of them were any better than a semen analysis. And then we started to look at DNA. And that was the thing that really excited us, because whatever we threw at these tests, whether a man had diabetes or whether he was obese or whether he was older, the DNA always came up with what seemed like a pretty reasonable answer to us. So, as I say, for years, I've been working in the whole area of male fertility. Now, I'm an academic, and I really had no interest in setting up a company to look at this. But what actually happened was we published a couple of papers with a very good PhD student, and he published one paper in the European area and one paper in the American area. And suddenly I had lots of people emailing me and saying, oh, this is great, can we have the test? And we didn't have a test. So that's what led to trying to provide a test which would supplement the semen analysis and give men a much better service than we previously were doing.
So, but your background is biology originally? Or?
Yes, my background is physiology, which is looking at how things work properly. And I suppose you would say that medicine is looking at things that when they don't work properly, or they don't work well. So my background is definitely in how cells function and how things work. But I have a particular interest in reproduction because it just seemed to be the essence of life.
And and the male fertility is also an area which I guess is at least been said for years in the IVF industry that it's kind of undervalued or not had enough focus, and that's been your key interest. So can you tell us about the basics of male fertility? We have a lot of men listening to this, but we probably also have a lot of professionals who are going to listen to this. But so we can maybe start on kind of the basics, and we can later on deep dive into maybe more technical aspects of this.
Okay. Well, as most of our listeners will know, you need one sperm and one egg, and those create an embryo, and then that embryo becomes a fetus, and then eventually we hope will become a lovely, healthy baby. But there are lots and lots of complicated things that happen along the way, and the sperm is actually one of the most complicated cells in our whole body. It's totally unique, and it, in order to become this funny little cell with just a head and a long tail, It throws away lots of the repair mechanisms that other cells have. So eggs can repair themselves, but sperm actually can't. So if something goes wrong with a sperm, particularly with its DNA, it can't repair that. Now, that may be one of the reasons why men produce so many sperm at one time. A healthy fertile man can produce up to 500 million sperm in one ejaculate. But the problem is that lots and lots and lots of those sperm aren't very good, and they would never be able to fertilize the egg. Now, the problem is, because men have produced so many sperm, we've been inclined to think in the fertility area that, oh, well, one of them will be okay. And we haven't really thought very much about the quality of them. As long as we can count them under the microscope and they seem to be swimming, we say, yeah, that's okay, that man's fertile. And so we have focused for the last 40 years on the woman. And we have done everything we possibly can. And there have been so many tests and so many different types of treatment and so many different protocols in IVF and ICSI. But we've done nothing for the man. And really what we have for him is just a semen analysis, which was developed in the 1940s. And it was actually developed for animals, not even for human beings in the beginning. The other thing that has happened, which has been a wonderful invention and a wonderful advance, is ICSI. And ICSI only requires one sperm. But the problem is, because we were able to do treatment with ICSI, we never really followed up on the research and development that we should have for treatment for men in terms of actually seeing how good the quality of the sperm was. So we were able to pick up one sperm and inject it into the egg, and we thought that's okay. But we didn't actually look at that sperm and say that's a really good sperm. And so ICSI has actually been a huge block in terms of getting to know what the quality of the sperm are like. Now, I think we've been happy enough with this over the years, but something happened in the UK a couple of years ago, which really made us sit up and take notice. And that was our authority in the UK, the HFEA, published their statistics for the year, and they showed that the most common reason why people had fertility treatment was male infertility. Now, that absolutely shocked everybody, because everyone assumed they were all female problems. I mean, what does the man do? He just produces a sperm. And what does the woman do? Well, she produces the egg, and the egg allows fertilization, and the woman creates the egg into an embryo, and then she has this beautiful environment in her uterus so that she develops the embryo into a fetus. So we've always thought that the man was really pretty unimportant. If he had a sperm, that was okay, but everything was to do with the woman. And now, from the HFEA, we've seen that 30% or more of the people who are coming along for fertility treatment have male problems. And I think this has made men start thinking, hey, hang on, we've been completely left out. We haven't been treated, we haven't been diagnosed properly, we expect more. So I think the next decade is going to be looking at men and involving them much more in the fertility journey than we have in the past.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So why do you think that is? One idea that came to mind now is, at least in fertility clinics in Norway, we do only have gynecologists working in fertility clinics. And even though they kind of, I think they acknowledge more and more that the man is important, the sperm is important, I think it kind of falls back to, I know everything about the female reproductive system, so it's easier to look at that. Do you think that can be part of the explanation? And what's the role of other medical professionals in fertility treatment? For example, urologists. I don't know, in Norway at least, as far as I know, there's no fertility urologist that's really good in specialized in fertility. Is that the same in the UK, or is that different?
Yeah, Magnus, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think that has been a huge problem for men, in that fertility clinics, certainly within the UK, are run by obstetricians. And of course, obstetricians have been trained to look after women, and that's what all their training is about. So they're very, very focused on the woman. Now, it's a little bit different in North America, because North America, they have urologists, and the urologists are the doctors who look after men and male fertility. Now, we always think of urologists as being people who look after prostate cancer and erectile dysfunction, all sorts of other issues with male reproduction. But actually now, I think andrology, of the study of male fertility, is becoming a much bigger area within the urological practice. This is also happening certainly in London, that there are a number of urologists who are focusing their whole area of expertise on andrology. And a number of the clinics are certainly bringing urologists in where they'd have a male clinic, one day a week or one day a month. And of course, the other thing that is happening now, and we really, really need the urologists for this, is if a couple has had failed ICSI and another failed ICSI and another failed ICSI, and we know that it's a sperm problem, what is the solution? And at the moment, the solution up until now, the solution has been donor sperm. Now, there are lots and lots of men who do not want to have donor sperm. They would much rather have their own biological child. And so urologists have started to go not to the ejaculate, but right back to the testis, take a testicular biopsy of a tiny number of sperm, and the sperm from the testis seem to have better DNA quality than the ones in the ejaculate. So this seems to be a new option now, and this is certainly happening in North America. It's happening within London, and I'm sure, throughout Europe. Those are just the ones that I know specifically of, where a man has a final chance of having his own child by using testicular sperm in ICSI rather than the ejaculate.
So when you say andrology and andrologists, that's been kind of a black box for me. What is an andrologist? It's not an education, as I understand it. Is it a urologist who specialized in male fertility? Can anyone call themselves an andrologist? Are there kind of any?
Well, in the UK now, we have specialized training programs where we have training programs in andrology as well as in embryology. And the idea is to give scientists and people who are going to be working in routine labs a much better understanding of the male, because we're aware now that we're very lacking in our understanding and our knowledge of the male. The other thing that's really important, and I think is becoming something we will be bringing into routine practice, is when you find that a man has poor sperm, things can be done to help him apart from treatment. Men and women are totally different in this respect. Women have their eggs really before they're born, and the older a woman gets, the older her I don't know what's going on here. Okay. The older a woman gets, the older her eggs are. It's entirely different from men. Men produce new sperm every 3 months. And so if you have very poor sperm, and it's because you've maybe been drinking a lot of alcohol, or you've been taking too many protein shakes in the gym, or maybe you're overweight, or you're smoking, if a man changes his lifestyle, he can actually improve the quality of his sperm. And so I think this is where urologists will come into our clinics in terms of doing clinical histories with men and finding out, what their lifestyle has been. Have they had mumps? Have they been taking certain medications that are actually bad for their sperm? And also doing clinical examinations, because another very common factor in men who have fertility problems is that they have varicoceles, which are just like a varicose vein on the testis. Now, these can be surgically repaired, outpatient treatment, very simply repaired, and within 3 months or 6 months, a man's sperm can be better quality. So I think the future for male fertility is to try to optimize a man's sperm before he has treatment. There are lots of things that we can do within that 3 to 6 month period to help a man to make his sperm better. And we call it fit for fatherhood, making a man really fit to be a dad in terms of the quality of his sperm.
I think we need to dive deeper into that, because I think that would be very interesting for our listeners. But before we do that, when you test a man, when a man comes for a fertility checkup today, in most clinics, at least in Norway, they would do what you're describing that we did in the 40s. They would come in, they would deliver a sample. We would look at them. How many are they? Do they swim fast? And some other things that I'm not, into the details of. Yeah. Are you saying that this is not really a very good predictor for their fertility?
Yes, I am. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. We absolutely should do it. I mean, that's the starting point. We've got to find out if a man has sperm. We've got to find out if they're alive. And the way you can find out if they're alive is because they'll be swimming. And if you look underneath the microscope, you can count the number of sperm a man has, and that gives you the quantity. You can see if they're alive because they'll be swimming, but there's very little indication from semen analysis as to the quality of that man's sperm. And of course, the most important thing once sperm fertilizes an egg is the DNA. That's all that's left. It's not its motility, it's not the numbers, it's not the morphology. It's how good is the DNA, because that's what's going to make the child look and act like their dad. So that's the most important thing. And we don't do that at the moment. All we do is we look at the outside of the sperm. We don't look at the inside. And so that's why I think it's a very poor diagnostic tool. Now, the other reason that I say that is because somewhere between 25 and 30% of couples get a diagnosis in a fertility clinic of idiopathic or unexplained infertility. Now, that's a horrible diagnosis to get. It's a horrible diagnosis for the clinic to give because it means they don't know what the problem is. And it's a horrible diagnosis for a couple to get because if you don't know what the problem is, how are you going to solve it? And the other thing is that there's a lot of confusion around this. I've had many couples saying to me, oh, we've got unexplained infertility, which really means, there's nothing wrong with us. Well, that's not the case. It just means that we don't know what's wrong with you, but clearly there is a problem. Otherwise, you would have the family that you so want. So the semen analysis is not able to diagnose what's wrong with 25% of the couples who are coming along to a clinic. And that's another reason why we need to get better tests.
But if you have a man and he has a lot of sperm and they're moving as they should, and you compare that to a man who has very little, there must be kind of a bigger chance for the man that has a lot of sperm and where everything seems, at least based on that, to be. It probably has some kind of predictive value.
And the way we use that in the clinic is to choose whether the person's going to have IVF or ICSI. So if he's got lots of sperm that are swimming, then he's given IVF. And if he doesn't, the reason why we use ICSI is really it's not a scientific reason, it's a pragmatic reason. We don't have enough sperm to do IVF, so we'll do ICSI instead. The problem is that you would expect success rates to be much higher if you injected the sperm right into the egg. You do all that work for the egg, for the sperm, even though it can't swim and even though you don't have very many of them. If you give it such a helping hand that you actually put it inside the egg, you would think, well, okay, we'll get 100% success or 70% success. But actually, in the 40 years that we have been doing IVF and ICSI all around Europe, we have had less than a 30-35% take-home baby rate. So that means that of every 4 couples that come into a clinic, probably only 1 is going to have a happy ending, and the other 3 are going to go home very sad, and they're going to have another cycle of treatment. And of course, so many of these cycles of treatment are self-funded. So it's a very expensive way to go forward.
Okay, so you do the basic semen analysis, but then you should also test then for the DNA damage, right?
Yeah,
this is where you come in, for example. So tell us more about how you can test the DNA and then the quality of the sperm instead of just counting.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And so that's what you can do. There are a number of different tests for DNA. In Sweden, certainly they use a test called the sperm chromosome structure assay, the SCASA SCSA. And that's a test which is available certainly in a number of the clinics there. The test that we have been developing in our university over the last number of years is called the COMET test. And we brand it as exact because it's a very exact test. But the reason why it was initially called the COMET test was because it looks like a celestial comet in the sky. And it's the only test where you can actually take individual sperm, take off all the wrapping around the DNA, and then if the DNA is broken, which is damage or fragmentation, then you can pull it out into an electric field and you get a big comet tail. So the comet tail, the longer it is, then the less likely you are to be fertile and the less likely you are to be successful with IVF. So we can look at DNA damage in individual sperm, and we can give the clinic a number of different results from this. We can say, well, the average amount of damage you have in your sperm is such and such. You have a proportion of sperm that's got really good DNA, so you're likely to be successful with IVF, or you've got a really high proportion of poor sperm with high DNA, so you're less likely to be successful. And then possibly, if you use those sperm and you have a failed ICSI cycle, then it might be a good idea to go back and try a testicular biopsy and try the testicular sperm. If you want a little bit more science, the male reproductive tract is very, very complicated. The sperm are made in the testes, but then they go through a long journey of tubes called the epididymis before they're actually ejaculated. Now, this is all a perfectly physiological process. It's a normal process. But what can happen as they go down this very long journey of tubes is free radicals can attack the sperm. And so by the time they get out into the ejaculate, they're damaged. And that's why if we go back to the testis, we can get these perfectly formed sperm just straight off the conveyor belt, and we can take them from there before they go through this war zone of the epididymis where lots of damage can occur.
So that's one of the practical implications then of testing the DNA. And if you have very high DNA damage, would you always recommend, instead of doing a ICSI, doing a tessa ICSI then, as we would say in Norway at least?
No, I think that would be too invasive. So I would suggest that you do an ICSI cycle. But if you have a number of ICSI cycles and they're all failures, and you've come to the very end of all your clinical choices, then I would say that that's the time when you would think about ICSI. Now, with testicular sperm. Now, the other thing is that the egg is quite good at repairing the DNA damage. And this can happen after fertilization. I was saying to you right at the beginning, the sperm can't do anything to repair themselves. But even if the DNA gets damaged, after fertilization, if it manages to fertilize the egg spends the whole night after she's been fertilized putting all the broken strands back together again. And she's quite good at doing that. But as she gets older, she gets less and less good at doing it. So it depends very much on the age of your couple as well. If you have a man who's got very poor sperm, but he's only 30 and his partner's only 30, then there's a very good chance that the egg will be able to repair some of that damage. But if the woman is 42, say, her eggs are much less capable of repairing the sperm DNA damage. So if you had a couple and they were in their 40s and you had a failure of ICSI, you might think about going to a testicular biopsy earlier, because you know that the woman's eggs will not be able to repair the damage in the sperm.
But how many failed ICSIs would you kind of accept before you went into the testicular sperm ICSI then?
Well, I would have thought a couple. But it depends, I suppose, on patient choice. It depends on their finances. It depends on their age. I don't think there are any hard and fast rules. And it's really only over about the last 5 years that the scientific evidence has been coming out to show that the testicular sperm have a very high chance of success. But because it's an invasive procedure, I wouldn't do it straight away.
No. Oh, it's aligned with what we are doing now, what you're suggesting here. We're doing some test ICSI sometimes.
And what do you do? When do you choose to do a testicular one?
I think the gynecologists discuss this with the couple after doing the DNA damage test in your lab. So I don't think we either has, I'm not a gynecologist myself, so I'm not exactly sure about the details, but I don't think we have any strict rules for, I think it's more kind of an individual.
I think it depends very much on individual couples as to what you decide to do.
Yeah. So that's one of the kind of the things you actually can do differently if you also test for the DNA damage then. But do you suggest that everyone who comes in for a fertility treatment should do a DNA damage test Do you think that's kind of should be a part of the basic routine checkup, or is it kind of like we're using it more now? Is more an indication if you had this, several miscarriages or poor embryo development, or we're not using it as a routine, and that's partly also a kind of a cost issue, because for us sending this over to the UK and back, it's quite expensive. It's almost double the price as the full checkup for the couple, the standard checkup for the couple. So but let's say in the ideal world where things were kind of more mass produced and the price were lower, or just from a pure professional perspective of doing the best checkup you can do you think that should be the routine?
Well, the most important groups I think who should have it are the unexplained group, because it gives you a diagnosis. And if those men have high DNA damage, they're not going to do very well with IVF, and they would do better with ICSI. So that's the first group that I think should be routinely tested, as the couples with unexplained infertility. And the second group would be the IVF failed implantations. So a couple has IVF, not failed FERTs, but failed implantation. And I would suggest that they are tested, because it may be, rather than doing another cycle of IVF, you do a cycle of ICSI. Can I ask you what percentage of IVF and ICSI you do in your clinics?
I would guess it varies I don't have updated numbers, but I would guess 50-50 actually.
Yeah.
Or maybe a little bit more IVF, but I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, because a number of very large studies have been done to show that when women have IVF, repeated cycles of IVF, that the success rates become less with time. So cycle number one, the live birth rate might be 25%, but if that woman has if women in a group have 4 cycles of IVF, the success rate will go down to maybe 15%. Now, I would suggest that one of the reasons for that is because the couples who didn't succeed the first time have got DNA damage. And so each time those couples fail, you try the same thing again, they fail again, you try the same thing again, and less of that group becomes pregnant. And the reason why I think ICSI works better for men with high DNA damage than IVF is because a lot of DNA damage is caused by free radicals. You've heard of oxidative stress. So if you have a group of sperm that have all got really bad DNA, they probably they're releasing lots of free radicals as well. And what you do in IVF is you take the egg and you put thousands of sperm in with the egg overnight, and the best sperm fertilizes the egg. But what you have to realize is if those sperm are really bad and damaged and releasing free radicals, the egg spends all night trying to protect herself from all these enemies. She's in a battlefield. And so even the sperm that actually fertilizes her she doesn't get an opportunity to repair the damage before the morning and before cleavage starts, and she divides into 2 cells and 4 cells, etc. Now, in ICSI, it's entirely different. You take one sperm, it may be a very poor sperm with lots of DNA damage. You inject it right inside the egg. All night long, she's sitting on this beautiful medium with no enemies, with no other sperm there, and she gets to work to fix the damage in the sperm. And we know from experiments and from papers that have been published that eggs can do this. So what happens in ICSI then is the sperm DNA has been repaired before the first cleavage stage. And so you get a much better quality embryo than you would in IVF. So if you have a couple who have IVF failure, DNA damage, why do it again? Why not go to ICSI? Because you have a higher chance of success.
But let's say you didn't have the DNA damage test then, like most clinics don't have. Should you do just ICSI on unexplained infertility as routine, you think?
No, I don't. I don't think that. I think everything has to be, evidence-based. And that's why I'm saying there are lots of reasons why people have unexplained infertility. We don't know what the answers are, but there must be more than one reason. But we have certainly published work from our university group showing that about 80% of the men who are in couples with idiopathic infertility have high DNA damage. So DNA damage is a major reason for unexplained infertility. And for those people, they are going to have very poor success rates with IVF. and they would have much better success rates with ICSI.
But so then, if you say that 80% of the people who have unexplained infertility is due to DNA damage in the sperm, then for 80% of these couples, ICSI would be better than IVF. Yeah. So it would be a better standard choice than IVF, right?
Well, I think so, but yes, I think so. But I mean, the best thing to do is to test. You know, before you go to ICSI, test your sperm and then decide whether it's IVF or ICSI. But I fully understand the implications of the cost. You know, that is an issue, and our test, the exact tests are expensive because of what we do, and we do it all within a laboratory, and we have trained personnel who are actually looking at individual sperm. It's not an automated system, so that's you know, you have to pay for what it is, but it is extremely accurate. It's very sensitive. It's specific, and it gives good results. But I understand the problems because IVF and ICSI are very expensive treatments for any couple.
Yeah, but also, let's say you could achieve a pregnancy one treatment before, and then it's a cheap test, you know, if you compare it to a new cycle. So
totally agree there.
So it's
plus the heartache and the woman getting older and you know, all the difficulties that there are with IVF for a couple.
But you said these specific tests. So I've seen, I think, like CASA systems, like these automated systems that have some, at least claim to have some DNA damage tests. Like I don't know, is hollow test supposed to be a DNA damage test?
I don't think it works very well.
No.
Well, that's my opinion of it, and certainly I can refer you to a systematic review, a systematic review takes all the evidence of all the different papers that have been published using different tests. And of the 4 tests, there's the SCASA test, the tunnel test, our test, which is called the COMET in this, and the HALO test. And the COMET test is a very, very good test. The tunnel test is a good test, but it's not available commercially in most places. So, and the other tests were not so good. The results were not so good. It's a review article by a group called CISSENS, CISSENS, is the first author.
So we spoke about testing and DNA damage and the implications for treatment. But what about a man who then get the result either from a fertility clinic saying that his sperm quality is low? Then that actually means that he has, you know, he's doing the basic test that's mainly offered today. So and he does a DNA damage test that, you know, get the results back, and he has high DNA damage, so his quality is with a much higher probability actually low.
Yes.
What can the man do then himself to actually? You said the woman can't do much to improve the egg quality probably, but the man can actually do something. So
yes,
what's kind of the best if you take it from best evidence to kind of more possible solutions?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I what we do with everyone who gets a poor result, I mean, lots of people do self-referral to us, and we send them all on to urologists. We suggest to each of them that they go to see a doctor who deals with male reproductive problems. I think that's the most important thing that a man can do. And if he has poor DNA, he's much better to try and resolve that before he has another cycle of IVF or ICSI, because the better his sperm are, the better the chances of success. And what a urologist will do is, first of all, they will check his semen for infections, because lots of men have subclinical infections in their semen, which damages their sperm. They don't know they have them. Now, that might be caused by sexually transmitted infections, or it may just be, you know, there are a whole range of infections that a man can have in his semen. Lots of them can be resolved by antibiotics. So that's a very simple thing that he can do to improve his sperm quality. The next thing is, as I was saying, about varicocele. Varicoceles are extremely common in men with infertility problems. And again, a urologist will be able to sort those out. There are some simple things that men do, particularly men who are keen on going to the gym. Guys go and they take protein shakes, which have high levels of anabolic steroids, nandrolone, in them. And this is actually very damaging for spermatogenesis. So they're within government permitted levels. But having said that, I would suggest to men who are trying to have a family that they don't take those. There are even things like anti-baldness regimes, treatment for hair loss, which can be damaging to sperm. Now, a urologist is the person who knows about all of these, and they can advise very carefully. The other thing, of course, that men can do is they can change their lifestyle. If they're very overweight, they could possibly try to lose some weight, although I know it's very difficult. If they're drinking a lot of alcohol, if they're taking a lot of recreational drugs. And we know cannabis. Our group in Queens did a lot of work on the effects of cannabis. And the way cannabis can make people feel very chilled and very relaxed. Well, it does exactly the same thing for sperm. And the sperm just swim round and round in circles. And if you give cannabis to animals and you then put them in to mate, the males don't even bother to mount. The female says, "Oh, tomorrow, I'm not going to bother." So that's a very bad thing to be taking for. You might think that it's make us chilled and relaxed, but it also affects sperm. So there are lots of things. Smoking is the worst. Smoking is really bad for your body. It's really bad for your health, and it's really bad for your fertility.
Okay,
so
what about, I don't know if you have this in the UK, but in Scandinavia, we have a lot of people using snus. So it's some tobacco that you put under the upper lip. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know of it. And it's not, well, any of these things can have effects. So if you can avoid them in your diet or you can avoid them in your life, do. The other thing is taking antioxidants. Again, the jury is pretty much out on these as to whether or not they work. You can spend a huge amount of money in over the counter or in ones that are supposed to be especially for male fertility. I mean, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have found anything. Now, if you go onto Amazon, I think there are 40 different products, man, fertile man, strong man, Superman, and all of these are supposed to help your sperm. Do they? I don't know. You could spend a lot of money and it maybe wouldn't help at all. But when you say overweight, smoking, drinking, how much? I mean, we also, at least I know from our history, that we also try not to impose too many things on couples in fertility treatment. Yes. So,
and I think that's extremely important. And I am not saying abstinence. I think that's a crazy thing to do because people get really stressed. And I know within the situation in Northern Ireland, if you say to a woman who's overweight, you've got to lose a stone, before you have, or lose 14 pounds before you have your next cycle of treatment, she'll come back in a couple of months and she'll have put on weight because she's so totally stressed about the thing. And I think it's everything in moderation. Don't tell people not to drink alcohol. Well, smoking's the only thing I'd say, really try to stop that. But try to eat a healthy diet. There's no doubt, that you can get all the vitamins and the antioxidants you need in a healthy diet if you eat lots of fruit and veg. And you try to cook. Now, at the moment, it's a lot easier to cook at home because of all the social distancing and restrictions. I've been cooking far more than I normally do. I mean, I usually eat on the run, as most people do. And yet that can be full of calories and very low in nutrition, just, the stuff that you get in takeaways. But if you can try to eat, red meat, fish, dairy products, low fat, but, lots of good quality fruit and veg, all of these things are really good for your sperm.
Yeah, so like a normal, healthy lifestyle, and no smoking. That's kind of advised, and not being too restrictive, because some couples are actually living through this for a long time.
I know. And quite often female partners are very strict with their partners, and I think that just increases their stress. And it's such a difficult time going through treatment that I think we need to do everything to support these couples as well. So I don't have any absolute rules.
Okay, then I think we know what to to advise the men on when it comes to this. Is there anything else in the fertility checkup or fertility treatment?
We haven't spoken about miscarriage. Did you still want to talk about miscarriage?
Yeah. The role of DNA damage in miscarriage.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the biggest advances I think we've made in the last decade and a half. I mean, we've always thought that if a man got his partner pregnant, if he was able to achieve a pregnancy, his sperm were absolutely top class and there wasn't any problem. And we've always assumed that anything that went wrong after that period, if a woman had a miscarriage, it was her body or her egg, or it was definitely a female problem. It wasn't a male problem. And then in 2012, I was the co-author on a review article where we pulled together all the data of even small studies, all the studies that people had done. And we realized that there is a strong association between sperm DNA quality and miscarriage. In fact, the higher the DNA damage a man has in his sperm, it doubles the chance of miscarriage, which is absolutely amazing that we've found this. I mean, it's awful and it's very sad, but nonetheless, when couples have a miscarriage in the past, we've struggled to get a diagnosis, and now we are aware that there is a male issue. Now that has now become part of the European ESHRE guidelines, that it's good practice when a couple has recurrent miscarriage to talk to them about male factors as well as female factors. And I think that's a major step forward, because if a couple finds that they have high DNA damage in sperm, then they have a diagnosis and they can do something about that. And they're going down a completely different pathway now than the one that they had previously, where it was 100% focused on the woman. And the men were feeling very excluded and often saying, well, what can I do? And we were misleading them by saying, well, it's nothing to do with you. But now we know it is. So we have a paper coming out quite soon where we have shown that 4 different scenarios. One is the very first miscarriage that a couple has, whether it's naturally at home, or whether it's a natural conception, or whether it's through assisted conception. High DNA damage relates to miscarriage. And then secondly, with recurrent miscarriage, where a woman has had a number of miscarriages, again, if you look at her partner, high DNA damage is evident in the vast majority of these men.
So that's really interesting, because I think I mean we have something, I don't know how to put this in English, but if you typically have 3 abortions, you start to do something in Norway. You start to take some blood tests of the woman, maybe even of the man. I'm not sure about the details there, but it's not much we can actually do. But if you do then check the DNA damage, would you suggest after 1 miscarriage or 2 or 3? And I mean, if you have high DNA damage, you can then at least look into what you've been suggesting before here, going to a urologist and also looking into the lifestyle.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because I think that's very helpful for the couple if they get a diagnosis and then they realize that, you know, maybe if the man is obese or he's a heavy smoker or, you know, whatever, they just have a much more detailed look at the man and everything about him, because in the past he's been completely excluded. And again, in these European guidelines, there are so many things that people have tried to check out for the woman, and nothing has come up as this is the very likely reason why you've had a miscarriage. So.
What's the how many clinics, I don't know if you have numbers of this, but to me it seems like, based on reports from our doctors going to congresses or being in congresses myself, it doesn't seem very standard to actually check for this. It seems almost, I don't know if controversial would be in the right word to use, but at least it's not routine at all.
No, are you talking about infertility clinics?
Yeah, infertility.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. No, I think within the next couple of years it will be, because more evidence is coming out and there are large studies being done. And I know there's a very large study in the UK which is being funded by Tommy's campaign, and they're doing a large study on miscarriage and DNA. And these, I don't think these aren't even couples who had infertility. These are just couples who achieved a pregnancy spontaneously, but just looking at their DNA damage as well. So when the results of that large study come out, I think it'll be adopted in a much bigger way.
Are there any relationship between DNA damage and problems with the child after it's born? Do you know that?
Yeah, well, we don't know. There's no direct information about that is the answer. But there are two things that we know cause DNA damage. One is smoking and the other one is aging. Now, again, we have always thought that men could father children right up until the day they die. The woman had the menopause, but men went on forever. But now we're realizing that when a man gets over 40, his sperm quality is considerably reduced. And we know that older fathers are more likely to have children who have autism is one thing that's associated with older paternal age, more hospital visits. There are a group of what are all the different groups? There are sort of neurological pathologies within the offspring, which are associated with male age. So you're asking me, do we know if DNA damage causes offspring problems? Well, from these two indirect models, one is aging and one is smoking, both of which cause DNA damage. We know that, yes, there are issues, both short-term and long-term issues in their offspring. So I'm not saying that to scare people. It's indirect evidence at the moment, but from a common sense point of view, it would make sense that the better quality the man has in his sperm when he becomes a father, or he achieves a pregnancy, the better it will be for their outcomes. Mm.
You spoke earlier about implantation rate and DNA damage. So you were saying that if we had low implantation rate in a couple, this could be something to be an indication for testing.
Yes.
What about fertilization rate and development, like if it kind of stops in certain stages of the...
Yeah, well, that's certainly something else that our test can do. It has correlations with fertilization, but also early embryo development, blastocyst stage, implantation, miscarriage, and live birth. So we have done studies all the way through, and we've shown that, yes, the DNA quality impacts adversely on all of those checkpoints.
What about there's some tests that aim to kind of extract the sperm that have high DNA damage, and like the MAX test. Are there any tests like either the MAX or other tests that seem promising or good on kind of selecting the sperm? That's a very good question. Yeah. At the moment, I don't think the evidence is there, but I think in another few years, we may very well find that microfluidics are the way forward. And what microfluidics are, you have a little slide, it's like an obstacle course for the sperm. And you put the sperm in one end, and the sperm have to go through all sorts of contorted, go around corners and go up and down or whatever, and come out the other end. The best sperm come out the other end. Now, what we would really hope is that those are the best sperm, both in terms of their motility, but also their DNA quality. Now, the evidence isn't really there yet, but if that were the case, then it might be that instead of the preparations that we do at the moment, where we use columns of different viscosities of liquid, so that the best sperm swim down to the bottom, and we take those sperm off and use them in IVF, it might be that people would start to use these obstacle courses instead. And that might be a way of isolating the sperm with the best DNA. So that looks quite promising. I can see that being a step for the future. Now, I still think there'll be a place for DNA tests, because it's only by measuring the quality of a man's DNA that you can then say, look, we've got to optimize. We've got to optimize his sperm health before we have IVF. This would be more of a process that would be used actually in the clinic,
So that would be something that could be done to isolate sperm for treatment. Now, again, I don't know if it works for IVF. I don't think it does. I think it just works for ICSI. I don't think you can get enough sperm through the obstacle course to use for IVF. But yes, that's a way forward. But for diagnosis to say to the man, what's your sperm health like? Could you improve it before you want to become a dad? I think DNA testing is probably the optimal way to go at the moment.
So we are moving towards the end, but I have one final question. I think in UK you seem to have quite a strict regulatory, what do you call it, body regulatory that controls the clinics. And we also have something like that in Norway, but I don't think it's as strict as in the UK. And they have published some papers on treatment add-ons, and they have even made this traffic light model on their website, which says, like, for example, that PGD is not recommended, or also
I know about this very well because I'm on the committee.
I'm
the committee which has discussed this. Yes.
And I saw DNA damage tests. They weren't really rated. It wasn't like red or green or yellow. It was more that it's unlike, but they say that the evidence is conflicting and depends on the type of test used by the clinic, and it's unlikely to impact the management of your treatment. What's your kind of reaction or thoughts on that?
Well, if you're asking me as a person who's on that committee, I would have to say I agree. If you're asking me as an individual for my own opinion, the reason why it's not traffic lighted is because it is not an interventional test. I mean, the add-ons that we're talking about is things that are added on to a person's treatment and actually impact on the gametes that are being used. Ours is a diagnostic test. It's not. So it's not actually included in those add-ons. But the second thing is, I think it definitely does impact on management. I mean, what I was saying to you was, if a person's high DNA damage, don't go for IVF, go for ICSI. If a person has failed ICSIs repeatedly, then you might want to use that piece of information you have to go for a testicular sperm cycle. So I think it can impact on the management, the clinical management as well.
Yeah, and maybe in a few years.
I think that's important.
Yeah, and maybe in a few years, this recommendation or this comment or whatever it is would have a different.
I think all of those will. I think all of those will. There's great debate over a number of the add-ons, and it's. I mean, what we're saying, you can only get a green light if you've got a certain number of randomized controlled trials to give the evidence to give you the green light. Now, the problem is, as you well know, it's extremely difficult to do research in this area. The success rates are so low. If you only have a 25% success rate in a clinic, which most clinics do have, or anything up to 30%, it's very hard to get enough people who are successful. The vast majority of your patients are unsuccessful, and therefore it's very hard to get numbers into these studies to get significance. So that's just a scientific point, but that's what we're working on in terms of having randomized controlled trials. But there's all sorts of other evidence in all sorts of other areas of medicine where we have much lower rationale. I mean, take for example, fibroids. There's no evidence whatsoever. Well, very little about when you remove or you don't remove fibroids. We haven't, and even fertility clinic, when we started ICSI a few years, 40 years ago, it wasn't based on randomized controlled trials. We just did it. So it's not a black and white issue.
No, and I've seen things on that list that, for example, oocyte activation, where we had couples who came from another clinic and they had no fertilization after ICSI in like 3-4 pickups. Come to our clinic, we do it on the first attempt, and they have a child. And you have, of course, that a story, it's an anecdote, but when you have enough of these, it feels very strange not to actually recommend that, even though it's a yellow light and not a green light.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the cost is not high as well, and the risks are not severe at all. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, Sheena, it's been great speaking to you. I've learned a lot,
And you?
and
Enjoyed our chat.
I'm assure both the patients that I know the patients who have a male factor. The men get more highly involved in the treatment. They look for good information about this, and I'm sure this will be a piece of information that's valuable for them. And I think also other clinicians and people working in IVF labs will have some benefit listening to this. So thank you very much for speaking with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
MedicusPodden.
Nå du endelig gravid. Varierer veldig fra par til par.
Takk for besøket.
Velkommen til MedicusPodden.